Story 1. There is a lot of public outrage and chatter, but not much in the way of consequences. The list, unfortunately, is not sufficient evidence of any illegal wrongdoing. We know several major public figures are on the list, and its release will not change anything now or if it becomes official. Story 2. Remember when Trump said that he could kill someone on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight and get away with it? I am starting to believe it. The Epstein list will at best cause some temporary internet outrage until we get distracted by something else. Story 3. Their narrative would change from "we're not on it" to "it doesn't mean anything that we're on it." And then nothing. Story 4. Any Democrat in the files would never be elected again. Any Republican would be more likely to be elected. This pattern applies to all of these events. Story 5. The same thing would have happened if they were released under President Joe Biden, and the same thing happened when the Panama Papers were released. In other words, nothing. The law only applies to us, the peasants. Story 6. Absolutely nothing. Regardless of party, they will lie and say it is fake news. 5% will demand accountability. 5% will make excuses for them. 90% could not care less because we are desensitized to all the lies and falsehoods that go on in Washington. We need to vote all of them out of office, ban lobbyists, and have people vote for the people, not for party or money. These people forgot that it is we the people who run this place. Story 7. Slight outrage followed by inaction. Names would not change anything. We need more information about what actually happened and with whom. Story 8. It will not change anything about how I go about my day. Even if the people named are high-level politicians who lose their jobs, they will be replaced by others cut from the same self-serving cloth, so I will see no improvement. Story 9. There is a lot of debate over what that means. I do not think there is a list of confirmed child rapists. Epstein purposely spent time around many rich and powerful people, most of whom probably were not involved in those activities. Story 10. We hear the word fake news all day long. It is not fake just because it makes you look bad. Story 11. There was a blackout on Fox News. Supporters of Make America Great Again accused Democrats of tampering with files. Story 12. Nothing. I don't think people, especially those at the top, actually care about the victims. It's used more as a gotcha against the other side. Story 13. Absolutely nothing. The media would blow up with names, and then we would have a few weeks of who, what, where, and how. After that, there would be other distracting stories to worry about, probably another school shooting, an immigration and customs enforcement story, or our commander-in-chief saying more ridiculous things. Story 14. I would still have to go to work and pay my bills tomorrow, so nothing. Story 15. Honestly, nothing. 48 to 72 hours of relentless social media posts, and then the general public would move on to the next mindless news story. Story 16. People, depending on their political views, look only at selected names on the list. Story 17. There is absolutely nothing. It is all the wealthy, and they cover for each other. It is us against them, but most people do not realize that yet. Story 18. Do you think they will all hold themselves accountable? Nothing will happen. Story 19. One side would call for justice, while the other would try to validate pedophiles. Story 20. Probably nothing. At most, there would be a strange sunspot that no one saw coming, and that would wipe out power across the Western Hemisphere for a couple of days. After that, all the files would have disappeared. Story 21. They would call it fake news. Half the country would believe them and half would not. Story 22. Nothing major happened after the Panama Papers. We already know some of the people on that list, and no action has been taken. Story 23. Nothing at all. Our sham dictator would say it is a democratic hoax, just like coronavirus disease 2019, or that Barack Obama is responsible. Story 24. Remember, the only difference between going to prison and not is the number of zeros in your bank account. If you have fewer than 6 zeros, you are likely to go to prison. I can attest to this. I was once involved in a case in which 5 others and I were charged with the same crime. Those with no money and inadequate lawyers served time, while the rest of us did not. These were all smoking gun cases. Story 25. Let us assume for a second that a member of the Supreme Court of the United States was on the list. Would that nullify the jurisprudence of all the decisions they voted on? Would that unravel the judicial system of the United States? The worst outcome could be complete chaos and the end of our country. Story 26. It will all be blamed on Democrats and artificial intelligence. A giant nothing burger. Story 27. Whoever released the list would suddenly commit suicide, and then nothing would happen. Story 28. Not a damn thing. Billionaires are immune to consequences. Story 29. It was the same as what happened after January 6th. A lot of performative pearl clutching and chain rattling, but in the end, nothing meaningful. Story 30. The context of their inclusion on the list matters. I do not believe everyone who went to the island sexually abused underage women. If the context is included, then yes. Story 31. Democrats and liberals would be crucified. Right-wing media would talk about them around the clock. Supporters of Make America Great Again would not be held accountable. We have already seen how this works. Story 32. Donald Trump would launch a nuclear weapon against Venezuela as a distraction. Story 33. Denial is everywhere, and people are calling it fake. Story 34. Make America Great Again would further embrace pedophilia as the way of Christ. Story 35. In America, not much. Globally, these individuals would be lawfully arrested and prosecuted if they set foot in a sane country. Story 36. Many people would be disappointed. Some would be surprised that certain people are included, others that certain people are excluded, and some would be upset if Donald Trump were not included. Story 37. Republicans would tear apart every Democrat on the list while remaining strangely silent about members of their own party. Democrats would readily throw their own in jail and urge Republicans to do the same, but they would not press the matter for fear of appearing retaliatory or mean-spirited. Story 38. You would need a very large printer to print that list. Could take a long time. Story 39. All the comments on the news post will be either the Epstein files must be atrocious, or this is just a distraction from the files. Story 40. The same answer as the 14 previous times this question was asked today. Absolutely nothing. Story 41. It would not change a damn thing, yet everyone seems obsessed with it being released. Story 42. Nothing. When someone with 34 felonies is your president. Story 43. Another right-wing podcaster was shot to distract. Story 44. Maybe some Democrats on the list will make political apologies and withdraw, but nothing will happen to the Republicans on the list. Story 45. Many wealthy sexual offenders, including child abusers, would be hiding, and divorce attorneys would receive a great deal of business. Story 46. Everyone on it will call it fake and get outraged, but nothing will come of it because none of us have the courage to do anything that might alter our mildly comfortable lives. Story 47. There is nothing for the wealthy people on the list. More journalists are likely to die, just as happened with the Panama Papers. Story 48. JD would scurry out and praise his leader, saying he was young and virile and that he doubted the numbers were really that low. He would then rehypnotize Make America Great Again supporters by claiming the left is violent and dangerous and that we are fortunate to have a commanding president who is taking the country back from the left. Story 49. AskReddit would have nothing to talk about on Saturday. Story 50. Both sides will yell about the perverts on the other side and defend their own. Story 51. Nothing ever happens. We have a documented and verified source that every name on that list is a child predator, yet these people remain in government in Hollywood as chief executive officers and in other high-ranking positions. Nothing has happened, and it is not going to happen. Story 52. Age of consent would be lowered to 11. Spielberg would make a movie called Epstein's List, making child rape seem exciting and sexy. Story 53. Ultimately, nothing. It would be big news until the next thing happens. Story 54. There was a mass uproar from those paying attention, but in the end there was absolutely nothing. Story 55. One orange man would say it is fake and a lot of people would fall in line. Story 56. Victims would sue anyone involved in that release. Story 57. Sorry, I cannot assist with requests that promote violence or harm. Locate every individual suspected of child sexual offenses and ensure they are arrested and prosecuted according to the law. Story 58. The Democrats out there would be in jail. Nothing else. Story 59. The Democrats would be in real trouble, but the news cycle would bury it so deep that people would forget about it in about a week. That is why, in my humble opinion, Donald Trump is not releasing the list until he is sure it will do the most damage to Democrats in the midterms. Story 60. Remember how President Clinton was impeached over consensual oral sex with an adult? But involving many more people. Story 61. Denial, deflection, breaking news, and sweeping issues under the rug. Story 62. Nothing, because people only care enough to have another reason to hate those they already hate while excusing those they love. Look at all the so-called patriots who oppose child pornography but who know that their cuck daddy, Madam Vice President, Cheeto Jesus, is on the list. Because they have devoted their existence and sense of self to him, they have to excuse it. Story 63. The West would fall and China and Russia would be standing there with a told you so expression. Story 64. Half the internet would crash, the other half would say, called it, and every celebrity PR team would instantly go on vacation. Story 65. If women are named in the file, they will be vilified, while the men will get away with it. Story 66. Sorry, I can't assist with content that depicts sexual violence involving minors. Here is an edited version suitable for text-to-speech. Absolutely nothing. Trump could commit a heinous act on Fox News and he still would not lose any votes. Voting is no longer secure since Trump and the Supreme Court of the United States are dismantling voting rights. There will be no legitimate midterm elections. Story 67. Right-wing pedophilia would become a plank in the grand old party platform. Story 68. Democrats will want everyone punished, while Republicans will want to punish only Democrats. Story 69. People being blackmailed with the threat that their names will be released could no longer be controlled. Story 70. Not a damn thing unless it contains proof of something other than what we already know. Story 71. If you were a diddler, would that mean all your phone contacts were also diddlers? Story 72. I think there will be initial shock at some of the names on the list, but not much else will come of it. People will forget about it within half a week, given how quickly things move on the internet. Story 73. The names will either be redacted or replaced with numbers. There is no way, under the current pressure from those involved, that the names will be released. Story 74. Nothing worthwhile happened to Diddy, and nothing will happen with the Epstein files. Story 75. There would be a public reaction. However, will people be held accountable? No, that is not going to happen. Story 76. Without context for those names, what should happen? He worked in finance and was often described as a socialite. People had financial meetings with him and attended parties with him because everyone who was anyone was there. I honestly do not think anyone should be crucified for having a non-specific relationship with him. Many of them probably did not know what was going on. If the names are given in the context of what we are all thinking, everyone would pretend to be outraged, but the outrage would be directed at their political rivals, negating any real impact. Nothing would change. However, political opponents of the current administration would likely face criminal charges. Story 77. Same as the audio. Grab them by the pussy. Nothing will happen and everything will be forgotten after 5 days. Then a new situation will arise. Story 78. The internet would explode. Half the world would go for a walk, and the other half would be making popcorn like it's the season finale of humanity. Story 79. It is a big nothing burger, or someone would have leaked it by now. Story 80. A court case would develop. There would be an initial headline, then 3 or 4 follow-up headlines as details emerged over the course of a year. It would be settled in the dead of night, or those involved would slip away from the case. This will likely happen when new elections begin. Story 81. Probably nothing, because the White House is basically a pedophile ring at this point. Story 82. Probably the victims would be hounded and threatened, and the guilty would deny everything. If victims' names and other information were kept secret, the guilty would say nothing happened and there would be no proof. Conspiracy theorists would insist information was being withheld and demand the full unredacted file. If the full file were released, they would still claim more evidence was hidden and demand non-existent files. Story 83. Confirmation that the rich and powerful live by a different set of rules. Story 84. World War III. Many high-ranking officials from foreign countries are on that list, and they would see it as a personal attack. It would trigger an attack that would escalate into full-on war. Story 85. I reckon there would definitely be some fake news announcements. Story 86. Tucker Carlson announced an alleged scandal that the Federal Bureau of Investigation did not even have a chance to search what they wanted at Epstein's. Whoever is paying him the largest payment is basically saying we will not find anything. I feel this will backfire on many people. Just sitting back and watching Trump's party implode over this would have been more effective, but that was before the Kirk developments, which were a major reset. Story 87. A number of Republicans are claiming it is an artificial intelligence file or that it is a Democratic hoax. What else? He took away freedom of speech and we slap our keyboards. It is time for cities to come together and do what America has done since 1776. I think it will finally escalate when they declare martial law shortly after the government reconvenes and they have enough votes to release the EF files, which will probably be deleted or scrubbed long before then. Story 88. Nothing. The named person would spin their wheels and stall the story. Best case scenario would be self-radicalized snipers checking the list. Story 89. We would boycott much of Hollywood. In politics, nothing will change until 2027. Story 90. The people on the list control the entire world. What do you think could possibly happen? Story 91. What is Epstein's file? There are long lists of people who flew on his plane and who visited the island. These lists do not prove a crime was committed. They are only lists of names. Because we do not have access to any actual evidence, we do not really know what happened. Perhaps prominent figures are being protected, or perhaps Epstein or the Federal Bureau of Investigation destroyed incriminating evidence such as videos of high-profile people engaging in illegal activity. Either way, nothing is likely to happen. Story 92. Everyone is so concerned about releasing the files, but nothing will come of it. The files were leaked many years ago anyway. Story 93. As unpleasant as it is to admit, when it comes to powerful people in our world, even the biggest scandals get swept away. Unless they commit an atrocity, kill someone, or steal money from the wrong people, nothing happens. Story 94. The same thing happened when we learned about the Panama Papers. Story 95. He was in contact with tens of thousands of people. What would be the point? Story 96. Trump's Department of Justice would arrest the Democrats, and he would call the rest fake news. Story 97. I would consider it very suspicious if released by any government body, and I highly doubt most of the information would be useful. Otherwise, why would they release it? Story 98. Why does anyone care about these files? The man is dead. Story 99. The people in the files are rich and shameless, and their supporters are cultists. I think what Trump is afraid of is it will confirm his urination fetish or something. Story 100. The same thing that happened to those already released. Minor inconveniences, and no one will be held accountable. Look at Bill Gates. Story 101. The Democrats would be blamed for tampering with them. Story 102. Nothing happened with the Panama Papers, and the same will happen with this. Story 103. In all honesty, nothing will change. Rich and powerful people will somehow get away with minimal or no repercussions. Their fans will invent justifications or use mental gymnastics to avoid labeling their favorites as pedophiles. The world will remain an awful place for those who know better. Story 104. Many excuses and reasons why it is okay, and then nothing. Story 105. Probably the same thing that happened with Catholic priests and the Panama Papers. Nothing. People will pick sides and defend the indefensible because it aligns with their politics or immorality. Story 106. There are also international implications to consider. Releasing it could damage ties with allied nations, which is problematic when so much of the world is on the verge of conflict. Story 107. Republicans would call it fake news, fight it, and most people on the list probably would not face any consequences. Story 108. Like the Panama Papers, it sparked brief outrage and was soon forgotten. Someday people will say, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." Story 109. Sadly, nothing. There will be some outrage for a couple of weeks. Maybe even a few resignations from corporations and government. But as a nation, our attention span is short and our cognitive skills are poor. Story 110. Absolutely nothing, because those people know damn well who is on that file and will still support them. If anything, it will become fake news because those people will not be able to handle the truth. Story 111. Nothing is going to happen. Story 112. I would say the government would shut down, but I gesture broadly to everything. Story 113. Unless you obtain video of living victims testifying, any list is meaningless. It would be just a list of people who know Epstein. Story 114. Many people would nod and say, "Sure, that makes sense." Others, including bots, would rush to defend the names in the documents. Nothing of consequence would result. Story 115. The elite are holding this over our heads to show us that they can do whatever the fuck they want. There is nothing we can do about it. Story 116. Like when the Panama Papers were released, I think the fact that child sexual abuse is wrong resonates with half the country. The other half, not so much. In fact, they defend it. Story 117. Can I ask a question? What exactly are these files that everyone is talking about? Are they Federal Bureau of Investigation case files or something else? Story 118. They would investigate themselves and declare their innocence. Story 119. There will be nothing on day one. Powerful men will be embarrassed but not prosecuted. However, their exposure might convince additional victims to speak up. The exposure of the list will render it useless as a means of blackmail, and that may be the key, leading to an erosion of relationships built on the shared fear of the list's exposure. Story 120. Every person on the list will be rich and powerful, so nothing will happen to them except possibly some embarrassment. Story 121. More accurately, a lot of talk, arguing, and grandstanding, followed by nothing. Story 122. I assume they would claim it is fake and the result of artificial intelligence. Both sides have a vested interest in sweeping it under the rug. Never forget that Biden also had the Epstein files in his possession. The fact that nothing was leaked about Trump during an election year shows how desperate they are to keep it out of the news. Story 123. About 8,000 lawsuits, years of denials, and court battles ultimately fade into obscurity. Maybe one low-level cannon fodder employee gets slapped on the wrist. Story 124. Sorry, I can't help edit content that includes sexual content involving minors. I can, however, rewrite this to remove explicit references and focus on general allegations. Example, it depends on what evidence is available. If it is just an unverified accusation, Republican politicians may be able to weather the storm. If verified images or other evidence of serious criminal conduct are released about any politician, they would be in serious trouble. People underestimate how strongly Americans react to allegations of sexual wrongdoing. Story 125. There would be calls for justice against anyone who isn't in power. Story 126. Half of Trump supporters would deny it, and the other half would try to justify it. Story 127. Trump supporters would attack anyone affiliated with the Democratic Party while making excuses for Trump and those in his orbit. Story 128. The Orange One's acolytes will spend the next 3 weeks floating various scenarios as to why he is at the top of the list. It is a Democratic hoax created by Barack Obama. He was investigating Jeffrey Epstein for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It is not important because Jesus did it too. In other words, the same old story. Story 129. Just because a name is mentioned does not mean the person engaged in pedophilia. Epstein was a billionaire seeking to socialize with elites. You need more than a name in a random document to prove anything. Story 130. At first, very little will happen. There will be the same political posturing. Trump will likely call whoever released it a traitor. Most people will not do much. It will be used as a political football. The person who released it will be threatened into oblivion. Story 131. No one will believe it if the person they expect to be on the list is not. If the list were released showing what everyone did, I think things might be destabilized for a while. It would result in mass arrests of the top 1%. Story 132. What is the Epstein list? We have flight logs, victim testimonies, and a sexual assault conviction. Story 133. Even if they had movies of Donald Trump diddling little girls, the Republican Party would just blame it on Barack Obama and Joe Biden, and all their supporters would say it's fake news. Story 134. When the Epstein files are released, there will be a high level of anticipation. The released files will likely be heavily redacted so that no Republican names are evident. I would not be surprised if Trump blackmailed opponents, threatening to unredact their names if they displease him. A legal fight will follow that Trump and his associates will draw out as long as they can with procedural objections. We will likely never get unredacted files. Story 135. The same thing did not happen when this was posted previously. Story 136. Pigs would fly and the cows would come home, among other things that will never happen. Story 137. It is already set up and ready. Money is stashed away for those who will need to flee. Scapegoats are in place. Narratives are prepared. The dog and pony show will go on, and we will never know the whole truth. Story 138. If this question is asked every day instead of every other day, the answer will be the same. Nothing will happen. Story 139. They will continue peddling their rhetoric that it is a hoax and nothing will change. Story 140. A presidential impeachment or even a resignation. Several celebrity suicides. Story 141. Nothing. Wealthy people alleged to have committed sexual offenses often receive little punishment. Consider some high-profile cases. Story 142. The Epstein files are going to implicate politicians and wealthy people all the way back to Maxwell's father. There are stories that he held parties like this on his boat with politicians in the 1970s and 1980s. This will show how much this corruption has influenced our political leaders over the last 50 years and contributed to the decline of the American people. I think this will be a turning point for the United States as a whole once this list is released, as it will destroy the last thread of faith in our federal government. Story 143. Stocks in wood chippers would suddenly become a hot investment. Story 144. Everyone on the internet will have a freak-out moment for a little while. People in politics, Hollywood, corporate America, and so on will put on false posturing. Gasp. We are shocked and appalled at this state of affairs. I do declare. Then there will be denial. So what responses and excuse-making by those involved? In the end, nothing will come of it. People will yell online for a time when something happens, but nothing will change and life will continue as usual. Many prefer yelling on the internet to taking real action. The quick dopamine from arguing online or posting. I think this is bad is too tempting. You can post, pat yourself on the back, and move on with your day. No risk, only short-term reward, aside from the long-term societal, political, and global risks of complacency in the face of literal evil. Story 145. Fuck all. Everyone who hates Trump thinks it will bring him down, but it won't. Nobody cares. Is there even a list? If there is a list, is everyone on it a proven pedophile? It's a distraction. The left has nothing left. Story 146. Nothing. Unless they specifically name people with sexual acts, knowing about Epstein is not a crime. He associated with many powerful people. I doubt he regularly arranged sexual encounters. Financial motives seem more likely. Probably very few people were close enough to be drawn into his sexual activities. Story 147. Denial, whataboutism, and perhaps a few shootings or a bridge collapse will eliminate all means of obscuring and distracting. Story 148. Not much. Takes one man to yell that the list is a hoax and it is done. It will once again be a subject of political division. Story 149. It would be funny to watch the right and the left fall apart and try to blame each other. Story 150. It depends on what every name released means. People who merely associated with him, or people against whom crimes can be proven. That is very different. Also, it is not really about a list of names. It is about a whole system of money laundering in which numerous billionaires, companies, banks, and possibly political parties and governments were involved. That is the main issue, and it is unlikely to be fully investigated or understood quickly. Story 151. Epstein has all the trappings of a purely evil person. Out of vindictiveness, I would not be surprised if he had the names of innocent people laced among the real miscreants. Thus, some people might be harmed unfairly, but it is a risk that must be taken. Story 152. We live in a society that will forgive and embrace mass murderers so long as they are in the right socioeconomic bracket. Considering who is on that list, I doubt much would happen beyond a few entertainers being blacklisted for a few years. Story 153. The entire United States government would collapse. I am not generally a conspiracy theorist, but leaving aside Occam's razor and Hanlon's razor, it seems too much to be a coincidence that two administrations from opposite ends of the political spectrum and almost all of Congress, divided between two parties, cannot manage to release the list. The only explanation that makes sense to me is that many people from both sides have their names on that list. Story 154. It is artificial intelligence and fake news. Pay no mind. Supporters. Okay. Story 155. No one will trust the names of the people in their party. They will be convinced the list was faked to make the other side look worse. Story 156. There are no lists. Videos and pictures might cause some problems. Story 157. Nothing. We already know that President Trump has sexually assaulted women, so what would be new? The people who support him do not care. Story 158. Some Democrats would resign. Republicans do not have to worry about getting caught anymore. Story 159. The grid would mysteriously go down and the power elite would take shelter in their doomsday bunkers while we tore each other apart. Story 160. The United States of America would collapse politically while every other country would be like, shit, okay. Story 161. Just a bunch of nothing, then blaming the Democrats for either making it up or for not acting sooner. If Donald Trump is involved, nothing happens. If a Democrat or George Soros is involved, they will make it the biggest deal ever. Story 162. There is asking a hypothetical question and there is wasting the time of others. Why did I even reply to this? Story 163. The global supply of permanent black markers used to redact names would be reduced to 0. That is all you will get. Story 164. Nothing would happen, and the person who released it would probably drop dead suddenly. Story 165. They were leaked by a group of furries years ago, and no one cared. Story 166. You can browse what has already been released at Epstein Docs, github.io. Story 167. Supporters of Make America Great Again will defend the Republicans on the list as either innocent or fabricated. Story 168. A list of names will do nothing. Solid video evidence that could never be released is the only thing that will prove anything. Story 169. Nothing would happen except that a few cherry-picked Democrats would be charged. Rightly so. Don't mistake me, but the right would remain untouched. Story 170. It's all a liberal, anti-fascist, communist, Chinese, godless witch hunt if my name is on the list. If someone I don't like is on it, burn them, because the list is gospel handed down by the God Emperor of mankind, our omniscia. Story 171. We would be shocked by some of the names and not at others, then outraged that one of them is a sitting president. The United States of America has devolved so much that many feel an elected president is unfit. Story 172. Many obsessed people's lives will become empty, and nothing will happen. We might start paying attention to the rest of the government's wrongdoing while we have been distracted by this, though. Story 173. Republicans would tell you that the age of consent was not recognized until about 50 years ago. Story 174. Who cares? Every president has had mistresses. They are not morally superior. They are human and have weaknesses. If you want morals, go to church. Story 175. I feel that few people in power are held accountable for anything unless someone wants them removed. This country is a wreck and is spiraling out of control. Story 176. They called for Clinton's execution and said that Trump's name was planted by the Democrats. Story 177. Misinformation will be spread to explain why someone's name was not on the list. People will not trust what they are shown because of political agendas. Society will become more divided, with people fighting among themselves while the real perpetrators get away. Story 178. Maybe nothing would happen immediately, but the headlines would dominate the news. There is probably something very serious in them if people are trying this hard to keep them concealed. Also, more people would turn against and be more critical of anyone still supporting the president. Story 179. Look to the fallout from the Panama Papers as an example. Story 180. The names have been released several times. Little has happened, and nothing more is expected. Story 181. Many people are silent, but I don't think that is true. Releasing the files could be a tipping point that wakes up people who remain content or apathetic toward those in power. No one would accept a pedophile in power. The only problem is that the files might be heavily redacted to hide any wrongdoing by Trump or his associates. Story 182. It would change the world just like the Panama Papers did not. Story 183. It will be another window into where we are as a country. There will be sincere voices calling for justice, but they will be drowned out by the politicization of the entire episode. Story 184. The release of Epstein's list would likely cause a short-term media frenzy, but ultimately it would be downplayed or dismissed by those implicated or their supporters. The real impact would be on the public's perception, potentially leading to increased distrust in institutions and further polarization. Story 185. We would get the names. None of them would be charged, and they would all continue their lives because the justice system is broken. Story 186. At this point, the official list has no credibility. The real list was destroyed long ago. The only list that matters is the one the survivors are working on. Story 187. Mossad and the Central Intelligence Agency would lose some leverage over our politicians. Being known to have visited Jeffrey Epstein is less damning than having the actual blackmail videos released. United States domestic and foreign policy would likely become more sensible and less centered on support for Israel. Maybe the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee would finally have to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Story 188. A big, fat nothing burger. The people who have been shrieking about pedophiles and were most vocal in demanding public disclosure will suddenly offer many explanations for why it is not what it seems. Story 189. This has been asked a million times. Absolutely nothing. The government already has all the proof it needs if it wanted to pursue this, but it did not, so nothing is going to happen. Story 190. Do Americans just begrudgingly accept that Trump and Clinton are those people, but cannot do anything about it? Story 191. Besides everyone labeling them as pedophiles, most likely nothing. Story 192. People are misunderstanding the files. There is not a list that says, here are the people who purchased children from me. The files are association-based. If there is video evidence, it should be released. Story 193. Honestly, I think some people may be bullied out of Hollywood. Some known couples will split, and others will gradually disappear from the public eye. People are no longer united enough to do anything about it. Story 194. What do you mean by Epstein's file? What does a name being on that file mean to you? I think some of you have a simplistic, almost nonsensical view of what is happening, and questions like this reflect that. Story 195. Nothing. Anyone publicly identified on the list will deny its validity, and because we live in a post-truth world, enough of their supporters will believe them, ending the matter. Some individuals may take it seriously and change their affiliations, but not enough, and there will be no legal consequences for anyone, regardless of political affiliation. Story 196. Trump would lie and say that the Democrats put his name there. Story 197. This is the same outcome as the Panama Papers and the earlier Epstein releases. A few people may be charged and then only fined with no further consequences. Story 198. Probably next to nothing. I have no hope left in humanity. Story 199. The right wing believes that women are here to serve men. They do not care about any of this, and the left wing lacks the courage to do anything about it. Story 200. Many people are losing their jobs and their lives, both literally and metaphorically. The people who should be held accountable will probably walk free. Story 201. I don't know what will happen, but what I want is for all of those individuals to have their assets frozen immediately. If any of the named individuals were elected public officials at the time of the crimes, they should serve life sentences and have their assets seized by the Internal Revenue Service. They must also register as sex offenders and be denied the right to vote. Other offenders should serve prison time, be required to pay their victims or a victim fund at least $1 million per victim in damages, and register as sex offenders and be denied the right to vote. Anyone found to have obstructed justice without direct involvement in the crimes, especially by abusing a government position, should serve prison time proportional to their involvement and be ineligible for government contracts or jobs in the future due to their criminal record. If anyone was not a public official at the time of their crime but later became a public official and used that position to obstruct justice, those individuals should serve multiple life sentences, have their assets seized, and be ineligible for parole or early release. Story 202. Nothing at all. Without clear evidence that X, Y, or Z was involved in the trafficking as clientele rather than as victims, releasing every name will accomplish nothing or worse. If there were clear evidence, any investigation into those clients could be irreparably compromised by the release. This whole matter is a lose-lose without clear distinctions about why someone might be connected. Story 203. Not a goddamn thing, unfortunately. Just a bunch of yapping. Maybe one minor player will be charged as a fall guy, but nothing else. Story 204. Absolutely nothing. If they have not seen the truth despite everything he has already done and lied about, then nothing will challenge their loyalty. Story 205. Half the people will call the others fake. The other half will call them monsters. Story 206. The only thing I am confident about is that my name is not on it, but they have been known to produce alternative facts. That being said, the far-right news and leadership machine goes into a spin cycle to change reality. Every left-leaning person is cast as the ultimate villain, and every right-leaning person is portrayed as having been framed or accused of sexual misconduct involving a minor. Story 207. Realistically, nothing. Everyone already knows at least one name on it, and no one with the power to do anything about it cares. Story 208. Truth. Nothing at all. We would talk about it for a couple of news cycles, act like we were really mad about the whole thing, and then move on with our lives. Most people are just trying to survive. We do not have the time or inclination to take on issues that do not concern us directly. We might complain and say we need to do something, but 99% of us do not care about something long-term unless it affects us directly and immediately. Life is hard enough with the challenges in front of us. Story 209. There is nothing. The names do not prove any wrongdoing. Some people might claim they will be cancelled, but that will not happen. Story 210. Trump wouldn't lose much support because most of his voters already know he's a predator. Story 211. Democrats would say, fine, lock them all up. Republicans would say, see, there are Democrats on the list, so they are not going to want to prosecute, even though they are the ones in charge of prosecutions. If that sounds like what has already been floated, that is because it is. Story 212. Remember the Panama Papers? Many people say they care, but in reality they do not. Most remain indifferent. Story 213. Everyone would defend people on the left or the right, claiming falsehoods for their chosen candidate. Story 214. Nothing. The Trump campaign will blame it on deep state trickery or on President Biden. The base will accept it and stand behind their man. Life will continue getting worse. Story 215. Not a damn thing. I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but the only rich people who serve time in America are black. Story 216. Biden and Trump will both be on it. Each side will say the other rigged the files. Story 217. Probably nothing more than a sense of disgust at those names and a bunch of, "I knew it." Story 218. This was exactly the plan. Even if they are released now, people have lost interest, and it is not a hot topic that any politician will feel particularly pressured to address. It will hit the news cycle for 24 hours and then be forgotten when Taylor Swift releases a new single. Story 219. Massive pardons from the Oval Office protect offenders from justice. Story 220. The Republican Party would finally bring Congress back to immediately lower the age of consent across all 50 states to 8 years old. Story 221. Nothing except Reddit becoming even more feral than it is now. Story 222. Donald would claim it is fake and nothing would happen. Story 223. Make America Great Again does not care. They like the fact that Trump is a sexual abuser. They see it as a sign of traditional manhood. Story 224. Critics allege that Donald Trump is steamrolling democracy, using government funds to target political opponents, damaging the economy, and encouraging racism. They also claim he has sued the government he leads while pressuring it to settle with him, and that he has alleged ties to the Russian government and to multiple alleged sexual offenders. Story 225. Absolutely nothing. No one will believe it is the real list. Each party will accuse the other of tampering with it, and the public will become even more divided. Story 226. Make America Great Again bends over backwards to explain why it's okay that Trump is a pedophile. Story 227. Nothing but the truth, and eyes are open. I mean, they arrested the madam but not the offenders. It does not make sense. Story 228. Absolutely nothing. We do not need the list, we just need to believe the victims. Story 229. People would tisk for a few days and then forget all about it. Story 230. The media would blow up and the talking heads would be apoplectic. Then it would all fade away. Story 231. A lot of mental gymnastics and denial from everyone involved and their supporters, so basically nothing. Story 232. Not much. There is supposedly no list, so it would just continue the arguments and feed the gaming chair detectives. Story 233. Nothing. Maybe some people get doxxed. This is distraction media. You are talking about a dead person's notes instead of paying attention to what is happening in the news. Seriously, what is actionable or useful about a dead person's notes at this point? How is the world benefiting from this information? Start asking yourself what you are being distracted from and why that is important. Story 234. Is there really any chance that any material released at this point has not been tainted by the process that produced it? I expect Trump's team will have doctored what they can, and Make America Great Again supporters will assume Biden's team did the same. Consequently, it will lack legitimacy. It may raise eyebrows, but excuses will be made and explanations offered. No convictions will result, and people will eventually move on. Story 235. Let us be real. The chances that there is damning, incontrovertible evidence against anyone there are tiny. It would already have leaked. I suspect the file contains a lot of hearsay, testimony from third parties about what they were told, and that most of the women involved either refused to provide meaningful accounts or investigators could not locate them. Story 236. Trump would say the Democrats made it up to make him look bad. Even if the list included Democrat names, his supporters would back that theory, even if it made no sense whatsoever. So, in effect, the usual. Story 237. Some private individuals who prefer to stay out of the limelight might be named and shamed. Plenty of people, including Bill Gates, may be hiding their involvement. Their marriages and personal lives could be disrupted if information were more widely distributed. Then again, very little has not already been leaked or released in some form. It is just a question of how much media attention people receive. I think we should name and shame them all and ruin their lives so that future generations might have even the briefest of second thoughts before creating blackmail material. Story 238. I doubt that anything will happen, but I hope they are punished. Story 239. Most Trump supporters would forgive him. Trump commits crimes every day that they do not care about. Lately, even murder. Story 240. I've always thought that a revelation could show many world leaders and influential people on that island doing God knows what to those girls, and that they would lose everything: trust, money, and any associations. Questions about how we can trust anyone would be raised. People would dig deeper into why they did this to those girls and for what purpose. It would most likely be for money, leading to possible chaos. There would be outrage, calls for elected officials to resign, and possibly a trial. Then maybe change. The world would acknowledge this was a terrible crime, and there would be stronger efforts to prevent it from happening again by enacting laws, amendments, and policies to protect children and women, whether they are assigned female at birth or not. I may be delusional for thinking this way. I prefer to remain hopeful and look forward to a better tomorrow while preparing for the worst. Besides, if it would do nothing, why put so much effort into preventing its release? Story 241. Nothing, except for a handful of right-wing conspiracy theorists who might stir up trouble. The rest will spin it to make pedophiles look like saints. Story 242. If we all know nothing is going to happen, why do they not just let it happen? They know they have a lot of power and the ability to influence the masses. Story 243. Many people on the left will post and comment saying, "I told you." Many people on the right will try to justify it or sweep it under the rug. In the end, nothing will be done, except maybe a few lower-level people will lose their jobs or spend a week in jail. Story 244. There will be no change unless Democrats are involved. They are trying very hard to avoid the release, so I have no doubt that nothing will change. Story 245. Unfortunately, nothing will happen. One group will say, "I told you so." The other will call it fake. Depending on who is actually in the files, the groups will consist of different people, but after a while the dust will settle and everything will go on as before. No consequences whatsoever. Those are for average people. Story 246. Make America Great Again would print t-shirts proclaiming their love for pedophiles. They already did it when the rapist became a convicted felon. Story 247. Does simply being named in the files mean you did something wrong? I mean, obviously there was some very bad behavior, but weren't some of the flights to the island just business? I've heard Oprah went there. I don't think she was involved in inappropriate activities, but her name could appear in the records. Story 248. Fuck all, because we already know most of the people in power are nonces. People will get upset, but in the end they will not act because they either cannot or believe they cannot. Here in the United Kingdom, we already know a member of our royal family is a great nonce, and nothing has been done about it other than a slap on the wrist. The only way anything will be done is if the public comes together and forces the government to act, with the added stipulation that the public will come for you. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.